Becky Henry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Becky. I am with the Children's Mental Health Matters campaign, as well as the Maryland Coalition of Families for Children's Mental Health. And I want to thank all of you for participating in this webinar today. I know that it's going to be great information, and I hope it will be useful for everyone. I want to let you know that Children's Mental Health Awareness Week is a statewide event in Maryland. It goes from May 4th through the 10th, so we're right in the middle of it. And National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day is tomorrow. So we have a lot of information, resources, fact sheets, events going on. There's a lot of information on our website, which is www.childrensmentalhealthmatters.org. And we're just very grateful to Dr. Berman for sharing her expertise on childhood anxiety with us today. Just a little bit about Dr. Berman. She's a clinical psychologist at the National Institute of Mental Health in Bethesda, Maryland. She received her clinical psychology doctoral degree from Rosalind Franklin University and the Chicago Medical School. Her clinical training continued with attending the Boston Consortium of Clinical Psychology, where she was a Harvard Medical School Fellowship recipient. She completed her postdoctoral respecialization in child and adolescent anxiety disorders at Temple University. And her main area of interest continues to be in cognitive behavioral interventions for children, adolescents, and adults with anxiety disorders. And I also want to let everyone know that after the webinar has concluded today, we will be sending you a PDF of the slides, and we will also send you a link to the recording, and we will also be posting that recording to the Institute's YouTube channel. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Berman.
Great. Thank you, Becky. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I took it off the speakerphone, so I think it'll be better if I just have my headset on right now. As Becky said, I am a clinical psychologist at the National Institute of Mental Health. I work with the neuroscience branch that studies anxiety and depression. And so today I will mostly be focusing on the interventions and the identification of problematic anxiety, but I will at the beginning go over a little bit of the neuroscience behind it, and that is for the reason that being able to understand anxiety and also express it to whoever's dealing with it, whether it's kids, having them understand exactly where their anxiety comes from, many times is like the first step in therapy and just overall getting people comfortable with the idea of anxiety, because it's really very normal to have anxiety. And then, you know, what I will present is how to deal with it when it becomes excessive. And I know we have questions at the end. If there seems to be a question with a particular slide, and if I can kind of jump back and forth, feel free to, you know, write it out, and I'll try to address it. If I don't, I'll make sure to address it at the end. So we will have 15 minutes at the end for specific questions. So how do we help children with anxiety? As I just mentioned, the first step is to really understand it. You know, I'm sure everyone can relate a time where they were either misunderstood at work, at home, by a family member, partner, and it's a very frustrating experience when you're misunderstood and people aren't 100% getting what's going on. So the first step that I always take is spending a lot of time with the child, the parents, whoever is feeling anxious, and really starting to have them articulate what it is that makes them scared. Now, with kids who have excessive anxiety and very strong anxiety, many times it is difficult to even articulate the anxiety and exactly what's going on in their head. And that's normal initially. But I guess the way I usually start, even for those kids that have difficulties, is to give them lots of words for anxiety. So nervous, scared, worried. In this context, you know, when we talk about excessive anxiety, it's anxiety that's mostly prompted by thoughts and feelings, and many times also underlying biological markers. Understanding panic as well is obviously a component of anxiety. You know, in a nutshell, if you have a child who, or an adult or anyone who's freaking out, I always tend to give the example of my husband when it comes to flying. He hates to fly, and it does stress him out, and it's only takeoff and landing. He would want that to be clarified. But the idea is, you know, when he's starting to hit that panic at the takeoff or the landing, you know, I always remind him, I don't go, oh, don't worry, oh, it's okay, you know, because I understand when panic kicks in, when that basic fight or flight response kicks in, there is no way reasoning with anyone. So just, you know, to take this kind of tip, it is if a child, anyone is having anxiety, at that moment when it's in the panic mode, reasoning, problem solving, all that stuff goes out the window. So it's important to understand that this fight or flight response is biological, is natural. I usually tell them, hey, you know, it'll be over soon, let's just kind of sit with it, and then you can problem solve after. So the next slide I'll go over exactly where anxiety comes from. So the nice thing with the anxiety disorders is we do know actually quite a lot about them, and we know how to treat them, and we know how to treat them relatively well. As I was saying earlier, anxiety is an incredibly adaptive experience. It's something we needed way back when. This image here is taken from an individual named Joseph Ledoux, L-E-D-O-U-X. He's very well known in the studying of anxiety disorders, and specifically anxiety at a cellular level. And what is important to take from this slide is that there's two ways of processing anxiety-provoking stimuli, something that's stressful. Obviously, most of us aren't fans of snakes unless we've been around them for a while. And right here, you know, in the brain, that there is a, you know, one little part that's kind of circled with a big blue circle. That is the amygdala. And we know from his research that the amygdala is where the anxiety response, the fear response, and also aggressive responses do lie. So what this picture is showing is there's a jumbled version of the snake above the amygdala, and kind of back below it, there's a very clear version of the snake. And what has come to be understood about anxiety, and specifically, and I'll go into more detail, but kids who have anxiety in excessive levels or with an anxiety disorder, is they process fear very quickly and very kind of not clear. So if any of you do have children or can relate about anxiety, you remember that they sometimes pick up on a threat where it's not really there, that they misinterpret stimuli. And it is because this amygdala is kind of overactive, and I'll go into a little bit of the research of how we understand that the amygdala tends to be overreactive, go off too much in children and adolescents and even adults with anxiety disorders. So as you can see, now in here, obviously the man is seeing a snake, so he's not misperceiving information. But sometimes, you know, an individual can misperceive information because they process it too quickly. So it bypasses, you know, that top pathway with the jumbled looking snake, bypasses the whole clear processing of anxiety and the whole thoughtful process of going through, you know, an anxious experience. So, you know, I'm not a fan of snakes, and I do remember, you know, when I walk through the woods, I also haven't seen very many of them, and I think that's part of it. You know, even sometimes if I'm anticipating it and I kick a stick or a leaf, I might kind of get a little shudder of an anxious response. And as you can see, you know, that's probably that top pathway going off where I'm not really thinking it through. I'm going, oh, I saw that quick movement. My, you know, heart rate increases, my body gets tense, and I begin to sweat. So this is really an important part for all of us to understand that anxiety doesn't mean you're crazy or weird. What it does mean is it's very normal and adaptive, and we have to kind of understand that sometimes, though, this was a system that was very, very useful when we were out more in the wild, and now it goes off many times more than we actually need it to. So thus we'll talk about how do you cope when it goes off a little too much. So these are the physical symptoms of anxiety. This image was taken from I believe, Science Magazine. It's the Anatomy of Fear. If anyone wants to Google it and find that, I'm sure if you Google Anatomy of Fear, you can find this. And I do like to have this and give this to any of my clients or any of the kids that do come into the study that we run. As you can see nicely on here, it's pretty clear, the images, and it talks about all the different components of the brain, the amygdala, which we just reviewed. The hippocampus, which I didn't really talk about but is important to remember, that's the one up and to the left, the little thing. It really connects the response of the amygdala, which is, again, our fear center, the all systems alert, to memory, long-term memory. And again, this combination, this connection is very important when you think about anybody who has excessive anxiety and only remembers all those negative events or remembers those very strong traumatic events. Again, this was initially something very important for us to have evolutionarily, where we'd want to remember the things that scared us, made us uncomfortable, were dangerous. The problem is an overactive amygdala and a memory center right next to it many times may create a bias towards negative thoughts when you have someone who has excessive anxiety. This also is a very important image because it helps kids or anyone understand that their response, the physical response, is 100% real. When your amygdala goes off, when you get anxious, it triggers an all systems alarm, as it says. Everything turns on in your body. I always, when I talk to someone for the first time, I try and help them identify what it is. How do they know their body's on alert? Because many times, because this is quick processing, your body may even tell you before your mind. The common ones that kids talk about are butterflies in their stomach, feeling warm, feeling tension in their legs, headaches, stomach issues, feeling like they need to run to the bathroom. And so again, these are all turned on by an anxiety response. Again, I always want to talk about a practical thing almost in every slide that you can do. When you are having an anxiety response, the idea is you can't stop it. So you can see the bottom part of the left hand of the slide. Your response is don't stop it. You cannot stop it. It increases, it peaks, and it's something that has to subside on its own. You can help the individual or yourself by just listening, being a calming influence, and reminding, like I said about my husband, remind everyone or whoever's there that this does end. As we all know, and I always give this example, the one time I didn't fly in the seat next to my husband, I saw him, a few seats up, and I could see him grabbing the sides of the seat, and then his talking increased, and he was talking more to the guy next to him, and after the whole flight, I asked him, I said, hey, how did it go? He said, it was all fine. He's like, but, the man next to me hated to fly too, and then we were both freaking out. So again, you want to even, if you have to, if it's a nervous situation, you want to have to even fake it if you need to in terms of being a common response. And that's hard to do many times when it's your own children. So this is the general structures of the brain. Again, I like to have this just as a reference. I, heard that they will PDF and send this, all the slides to everyone, all the attendees, and that's very important. A lot of, kind of words are being thrown around now in terms of executive functioning disorder. So I like to go over this because that executive functioning does play a role in managing anxiety. And excessive anxiety. If you look at the first part, the prefrontal cortex, that is where the executive functioning comes from. It regulates, think about this, your thoughts. It regulates your emotions and your actions. That part of the brain is not, fully developed and formed and connected until now they're thinking 18, 19, 20 for females and not till, mid-20s for males. So this is the part that helps you regulate yourself and calm yourself. As you can see, this slide does talk about how it's also vulnerable to elevations of brain chemicals caused by stress, and as it says there, it matures later in childhood. So eventually, we do get better control over our emotions, but especially through young age and adolescence, that is a difficult thing because we don't have all the tools naturally in our brain. So that's why I'll talk a little bit about the different tools that you can use and to enhance that frontal part of the brain. And we talked about the amygdala before and the hippocampus, which again is memory. It's the center of short-term memory, and it connects emotions of fears together. So it's an important thing to understand, especially when you have kids where those anxious memories are kind of stuck in their brains. So to give you a quick overview of what our research, how we translate, this kind of information into treatment and better services for kids is, what we do is we study kids using fMRI, so that's functional magnetic resonance imaging. We essentially, this is one task that was done a while ago, and you can see the bottom of the slide says the circuitry of attention bias in pediatric GAD. GAD is generalized anxiety disorder. So we took the initial model from Ledoux, and we decided let's test this in kids, adults. And what we do is we take this image that you see right here, we jumble it and we send it very quickly. So in milliseconds, we pop it on the screen. And what was shown in this research is that individuals, kids that did have a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, you could see that their amygdala really went off much more. It lit up more when they had this very quick presentation of kind of this angry face. And again, that kind of goes back to the idea that there is some natural inborn overreaction of the amygdala that leads to many times a misinterpretation of stimuli. So these kids kind of are always activated and always on guard when you know, I'll talk a little bit about what is specifically generalized anxiety, but these are these kids that are on guard. It's hard for them to relax. They're always kind of tense. They're worriers, and so even just visual stimuli of a face that's not someone they know will turn on the amygdala, and the anxiety reaction is what we've found. So since we do know that children and adolescents have a bias towards threat, there is this new novel intervention that we're testing. This is called attention retraining. You can Google it. I'll show you. The next slide has a short article in The Economist that helps really explain it. We are testing it right now. We don't know if it does work, but essentially, that quick processing that in milliseconds that allows the amygdala to turn on before really a child is conscious of their reactions. We want to try and get at that because therapy, the cognitive behavioral therapy that I'll talk about, really gets that explicit learning, learning that you can help them engage the front of their brain, but that quick amygdala activation, we want to try and get at that. And so what this is training the attention. If we have children who have an anxiety disorder and we show them these two images, their eyes tend to fall towards the negative, that little angry face on the left. What we do, as you can see, is there's a probe behind that neutral face. And what we have kids do is we train them to looking at that neutral face by, we don't tell them or make it explicit, but by continuing to have two choices for their eyes and making sure that probe on the right side is behind that neutral face. Again, a better, probably more straightforward explanation is, you can look up this article online, The Therapist-Free Therapy in The Economist in March 2011. Again, we don't know if it works. Still, out for debate, and that's why we're studying it in kids. But I want to make people aware that this is a new direction that research is going. So when does anxiety become a disorder? Again, as I mentioned earlier, anxiety is a very normal, natural process that all of us, have connections to and have experienced. So when does it become a disorder? And I love this little, the anxiety girl. She's able to jump to the worst conclusions in a single bound. Those tend to be our, anxious, generalized anxiety kind of kids. But the first thing that you might make you aware that anxiety has hit the disordered level is avoidance. Avoidance can be very subtle, and it's obviously, for many reasons, the main way that kids tend to cope with anxiety. It's not very helpful in terms of the long run, but if you can imagine avoiding what makes you scared, that quick, being able to avoid it means you won't actually feel scared if you can avoid those things. So, I guess I usually really probe for that initially with parents. So has the world, essentially become smaller for anybody, for the parents, because the parents may have to do more to accommodate the anxiety to help the child avoid, even though they're not realizing it. Has the kid kind of stopped things that they used to do, or kind of made up, again, lack of a better word, excuses that, oh, I don't like soccer anymore because the coach is mean, and I don't like this because that kid on the team made fun of me. The kids, when they feel anxious all the time, do want to avoid the situations that make them anxious. However, avoidance in the long term will only allow the anxiety to grow larger and larger. Interference is obviously usually when I first see the kids and they come into the clinic because it's interfering in their lives, either socially, school relations, or their parents' lives. excuse me, we'll talk about separation anxiety, and those are the kids that may eventually end up in the parent's bed every night, or at least it's hard to leave them, hard to go do things. So that's when we talk about interference. Or the school has finally contacted the parents explaining that they're having difficulties doing their schoolwork, completing their schoolwork, or paying attention in school. And distress, you know, a common thing that I hear with these kids is, these kids, may have difficulties evident in school to the teachers. But many times, anxiety, as we know, anxiety is an internalizing disorder. And what that means is you don't tend to always see that in the school setting. They'll be very quiet. They'll be very compliant in terms of the classroom. But they really, when they come home, as parents say, they let it all out. So they're very distressed at home. They're very overwhelmed, and that's where they tend to see the distress. You may see it at school too, or in certain situations, but the parents tend to be the ones who are aware of that. And again, because anxiety is normal, we want to understand that it's a persistent thing, a persistent worry. When it's persistent, which, in a nutshell, that means more than 3 months of the worrying or the focusing, then we want, or the focusing on those negative outcomes, then you might suspect it may be an anxiety disorder. As we can see, a lifetime prevalence of 25% or 3 to 25% in epidemiological studies. What that means, at one point in a life they will have the diagnosis. That's a quarter of the population, and we know once you have one disorder, so if you tend to have attention deficit disorder, or learning disabilities, or depression, or spectrum, on the spectrum, that we know the risk for anxiety disorders increases. Let's see, I'll move on. And if we have questions as we go to a pertinent slide, feel free to write them. I will try to address them. So the anxiety disorders, they are separation anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, social phobia, specific phobia, panic disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The ones on the bottom I will not focus on as much because they're, number one, not as prevalent. And specifically in the younger kids, panic disorder is less common. As kids hit puberty, it tends to increase. And panic disorder is the fear of fear, so the fear of having another panic attack, just so people are aware of that. And post-traumatic stress disorder is different than the other ones. A trauma can, of course, turn any of these anxiety disorders on, but you obviously have to have a trauma to get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So again, like I said, in a large study of kids 13 to 18, at least 8% we have there have met criteria for anxiety disorder, and symptoms commonly start to emerge around the age of 6. Anxiety is highly comorbid, again, important for anyone who's listening and have kids who struggle with any types of, impairment. 65 to 84% in clinical samples, that's huge. So that commonly goes with depression, behavioral disorders, substance abuse, and other anxiety disorders. So separation anxiety disorder is kind of mommy's little shadow, daddy's little shadow. They're the ones that don't want the parent to leave the house. They are ones that may have worries about themselves. So someone coming into the house, robbing the house, kidnapping them, or they may have worries about their parents, maybe getting in a car accident. They're constantly checking and making sure that their parents are okay. There are themes of monsters, illness, natural disasters, driving safety, as these kids tend to think of. And again, it's not uncommon if something happens nearby. Let's say if someone gets robbed or in your house nearby, and a kid might worry about it for a few weeks or even a month. But once it's persistent for 3 months, you start to be concerned that it might be a disorder. The average age of treatment is usually around 8, 9, or 10, but currently I'm seeing a girl who is actually 17 years old. And she was very clever. And what you'll learn with the anxiety disorders is kids will try and figure out ways of reducing it, but again, in the long run, it backfires. And I asked her how she was able to, for so long, be able to contend with it till now. And she said, the wonders of the iPhone. And she said, she's able to track her mother on the iPhone. So she only worries about, anything happening to her mother, and she notices if her mom keeps moving throughout the day, and all those good things that, her mom is still alive. So again, kids are very smart and very clever. After each of these diagnoses, I will have some quick accommodations. Again, that's why this will be important that you have a PDF so you can look and refer to this later on. So parents sometimes complain that getting to school, school refusing may be a symptom, or maybe something that goes with the separation anxiety. And these are ways that you can talk to the school about having them help with accommodations. With accommodations and behavioral interventions, the way I always explain them is, I think initially to get the kid in school to feel comfortable, to get over the worry, you want them present, but eventually you want these things to fade because you obviously can't have them checking in every day for, the foreseeable future, but that is something that can help the transition to school. Also allowing extra time for moving one location to another. Anxious kids in general don't like change or things that are different. That makes them uncomfortable and anxious, so having them be aware that they have a little wiggle room can be very, very helpful. And again, important to impart on the school, I know we're ending the school, near the end of the school year or anywhere, is that sometimes, anxiety obviously makes you kind of want to stop or fight or flight. And so, some anxious kids refuse to follow directions, and that may be, and for the teachers and the school to know that it's a symptom of anxiety rather than intentional oppositionality. A generalized anxiety disorder, those are our worriers. It's not linked to any one single situation. A lot of times these kids worry about school. They worry about, the future. They may worry about health. They may worry about storms. They may worry about illnesses. They may worry about, is it going to rain today? These are our what-ifers, or they're constantly kind of chewing on what is happening in their brain and what could happen in the future. Again, like I said, they're distressed over a number of different things. These kids are very self-critical many times and perfectionistic. And I always want to reiterate with the perfectionism, it doesn't always have to be your classic straight A, I overwork so I don't have to deal with failure. It also can be the kids that just simply refuse to do some work because they're afraid of failure. So it's not just our straight A kids who may have this, it's also kids that struggle in school. So it is helpful when you have these kids because most likely, as we looked back, the epidemiological study says many times these symptoms begin as early as 6. And, again, I've heard ones begin even earlier. The kids start to realize that what worry sounds like because they just believe it's true in their brain. So helping them recognize the what ifs, or when something goes on in your brain more than a few minutes, that rumination. Making sure that they understand that this is what is worry and what are just thoughts, because that are maybe productive or problem solving in nature. And help them understand that you don't need to react to these thoughts, whether they're worried about an illness at the moment or not completing an assignment. You want them to relabel it. It's not me, it's worry, I'm not weird, I'm not in danger, I'm not, insert whatever it is that they're worried about. This is a false alarm. So again, as we're showing, the amygdala goes off too much. Anxiety is really a false alarm in many ways. So a really important thing to remind them is no thought, no matter how horrible, changes what is going on in front of me. And many times people get wrapped up into their thoughts and their minds. And just because I have the thought doesn't mean it's true. These are all important ways, or ways that you can lay out that might be helpful to cope with worry in the moment. You want them to kind of review these before you get that moment of worry, because they're not going to be able to do it when they're, like we said, when they're panicked and freaked out. But again, have them choose what are one of these interventions that they might seem works. Challenging negative thoughts is incredibly, incredibly helpful with worry. So this is more in terms of the perfectionists or the worries about what people perceive. No one likes me. I messed up during class. Now it's over. You always want to empathize first. And I get parent after parent, many who are incredibly empathetic and many who just don't understand anxiety because they just don't have excessive anxiety. They just say, so I had a client last night, and the little girl, was worried about what another girl thought of her. And I brought her dad into the session and just to help him understand. And he said, well, so what? My daughter's awesome. And that was so very true. And he just said to her, so what, that you're worried about this. Really what was important and what she came across with her is that she wanted, her dad to just empathize first. And again, it's also important, then there's also the parents who will empathize and then fix right away too. You want them to come up with ideas, your kids, because if they don't, then many times if you just throw it out there, they'll just say, you know what? I don't like that idea, or then eventually they'll feel like nothing really works. And helping them define helpful versus unhelpful thinking is incredibly helpful. You know, I had this as the same little girl last night. You know, she was worried about what the other girl thought of her. She was also worried about how she had done on a project and she hadn't completed it, that the teacher, she was afraid the teacher was going to yell or the teacher was mean, and that then she kept complaining about the teacher. And again, the teacher does stress her out at times, but I helped her understand, you know, is this helpful to think about right now? Is this helping you complete your work, or is it an unhelpful way of thinking? And most kids can understand that. Social anxiety is the most common, and it's more common in adolescents. You're worried about, you know, these are the kids that tend to be quiet, may hide behind their parents, difficulties speaking up in class, maybe difficulties presenting. You know, again, you really have to kind of understand social anxiety in a case-by-case basis, simply because I have plenty of my socially anxious kids who won't get up on stage and perform, and then on the other end, I have still socially anxious. I even have a selectively mute girl who loves to perform and get in front of people. And how does that work? Well, essentially, I understand it as, you know, when you perform or you do a play, there is structure, and it's when there's that unstructured kid interaction that really many times ups social anxiety. So what you'll see is the best approach to dealing with the anxieties, because we know it's very brain-based, is something that gets very locked in, is you really have to kind of face those fears head on. But you want to do it in a very slow process, in a very agreeable, obviously, to the kid and the student, and in a very slow way. So, like I wrote here, if the student fears speaking in front of the class, you allow them to have a speech read by a peer first. These are just the steps that you might take. And, you know, you would use, you know, you could come up with these steps many times. The teachers may be helpful in coming up with these steps or what would work in their classroom. And obviously having a therapist that's familiar with exposure therapy or the therapy that takes a desensitization approach, they could also come up with this list. But I like to provide a list that you have in case this is something, or just to give you an idea of how you would attack it in a behavioral way. So they might have whatever they wrote down read by someone first, then read it into a recorder and have the teacher listen, then introduce another student to doing speeches and do the speech with just one kid and then having them read their own speech. It's just kind of, I wanted to kind of give an example of a desensitization approach. Another thing that's important to have in the schools, if you have a child that is constantly kind of having panic symptoms or being triggered by some anxiety, you know, thoughts or feelings, have, you know, a couple people or one person in the school, a designated staff, have the kid know that's where they can go, have a flash pass to get out of class if they need to, and have a plan written down at that teacher's place or at that counselor's place, and the kid understand these are ways to kind of, there's always a way, a strategy of dealing with the anxiety in class. It's just or in school. Because many times kids feel after they've been muscling through it for many, many years or even just a couple of months that there is no way of dealing with it in school. And we don't want them to avoid school. Obviously, the most important thing is that the kids are in the classroom. If you have kind of in the moment physical symptoms that are just intolerable, you want to provide something else to distract them from the symptoms. So think of have them come up with a phrase or a coping thought, an activity, breathing, and obviously, as I said, all of this needs to be practiced ahead of time. You can't just in the moment say, start to breathe, because, you know, that's very hard to do just on call. Let's see. So we have, in general, you know, again, like I was saying, this is just a summary, that anxiety tends to be less apparent than the behavioral disorders because it's an internalizing disorder. Some of these kids may appear as good kids, but they do perform poorly in school, and they are perfectionists. There are many times somatic complaints, as we showed with the whole images, you know, of the brain. There is so much that is, you know, going on in the brain, in the body, when you are experiencing a anxious thought or an anxious situation. And you can only imagine, you know, if you're a socially anxious kid and you're in school, there's social interactions constantly, so they're probably always on guard. If you're a generalized anxiety or a worry kid and you worry about performance or how others perceive you, you're always maybe be on guard. And if you're in a separation anxiety child, you may, you know, be thinking about your parents or what could happen or when they will be picked up. So again, that kind of worry and the body is kind of always on guard while you're at school. And, you know, I don't go into a slide here about it, but one thing to keep in the back of your mind is you can imagine that if you're always worried about any of those things or any number of things, it is hard to concentrate in school. So concentration, you know, many times can be linked to attention deficit disorder, but I have a girl currently in our clinic now, and we're not quite sure, is it all anxiety that's presenting and making her look like she has ADHD or attentional issues, or is it you know, just ADHD plus anxiety. So just important to keep you in the back of your mind that it may just be not simply ADHD when it comes to inattentiveness at school. So very important, you have to keep a balance. Yes, we all preach it, even I preach it, and I have a hard time keeping a balance in my life and working, taking care of myself. But it really is to deal with anxiety and to have kids successfully push through the anxiety disorders. So be sensitive, like I said, be empathetic. Educate, which is why I spent all that time in the beginning having you understand, have the child understand what they're experiencing. Be more positive, be calm, be very consistent. So whatever you decide you want them to start to face or work on, and they decide, make sure that they follow through, even those little steps. Being consistent, even if it's a very, very tiny accomplishment, but you do it every day, is a fantastic way to start to chip away at anxiety. So I'll give it an example in the case of separation anxiety. You know, let's say the kid, no matter what, is saying, you know, I still can't leave my mom or let her go to the store. Even if she can sit in the house, you know, with dad upstairs and mom out in the front in the car for 5 minutes, and she can tolerate that, practicing that every day. And maybe mom can't drive away, but even doing that really starts to chip away at those really strong connections, neural connections in the brain. Again, like we said, slowly face their fears. Don't throw any kid into anything traumatic, and seek additional resources, which can be the school, other therapists, psychiatrists. Do not accommodate the anxiety too much, so don't let the kid back out of too many things. You want to, again, have a balance where you're being sensitive. You're not pushing them too quickly, too fast, too quickly, but you also want to, you know, push them too. Don't let them avoid too much, as I write. Don't single the child out or ridicule them, and that's kind of for more the school setting and teachers to understand. You know, if you have a kid who's very sensitive about performance and how they do, you know, you really don't want to, if they forget to turn something in that one time, you know, it may be normal to say, hey, in front of the class, why didn't you turn this in? But you don't want to single them out in that way just initially while they're learning to get over their anxiety. Don't, as a parent or caregiver, provide too much reassurance. What that is those kids that ask so many questions. Are you sure it's going to, you know, are you sure we're going to be okay? What if it rains? Well, you know, are you sure the house will be here? Are you sure you're going to come pick me up? Don't reassure them too much. And you know, if people are curious about how to deal with that, I can talk about that in more details when it's time for Q&A. Don't be too directive, taking over. Like I said, have the kids come up with ideas, solutions. If they can't come up with their own, the way I usually do it is come up with a big list of all the possible solutions. They can be silly, they can be ridiculous. So, you know, I had a little girl that I'm seeing currently who is selectively mute. And, you know, she wants to talk to new kids when they come to the school, but she's nervous. And so I said, well, what about, you know, first, you know, what would you do? How would you do it? And she couldn't, you know, decide. And so we came up with a laundry list of all the things, you know, actually I thought about all the things that many kids have talked about doing, you know, maybe just rehearsing what you would ask them or say to them beforehand. Another one that I came up with was, you know, actually bringing a friend with you when you go introduce yourself to this child. And I gave her a whole long list, and she was able to pick the one that she liked and then use that. So that's another way of not taking over too much, but helping them come up with alternative solutions. So balance, again, is between validation, being empathetic, being understanding and accepting where they are, not freaking out, and problem solving. And again, this is kind of the, you know, we talked about desensitization, we talked about empathy, we talked about being able to calm down, but then also problem solving. Like I was just giving you the example with, you know, with my selectively mute girl that I'm currently treating, is focusing on change, what they want to do, and think of a different way that they can solve that problem. So you really want to go back and forth on that teeter-totter. So this is one way I present problem solving to kids. I let them, you know, first we have to really, like I said, that's why I spend so much time really identifying what is the anxiety, what is the worry, what is the exact problem. Explore information, like I said, creative ideas. So what is some information about what the worry is? Laying out a million different, you know, ideas and solutions. Select the best idea, you know, that they think will work. Test that idea out, and then see how they're doing. So, you know, it's very, very simple in a way, but it is difficult. But getting a child or anybody to understand the problem-solving skills is incredibly important moving, you know, forward in their life. Like we said, when we look at research, when I speak clinically, where you get the most benefit is from the behavior, so from testing out your fears and then facing your fears, all in very, very small steps, like explain with the separation anxiety kid. You know, you could literally have them sit in their house for 5 minutes while mom sat in the car, and then the child still go with mom to the store, but just being able to do that little by little is helpful. Modeling, you know, when I have little bitty kids, I have them identify a character, Spider-Man, any character that they feel, you know, and if you look up stories about any of these characters out there, they have kind of overcome fears or worries or problems, and have them identify with that, and then that's kind of their hero or their model character to watch. And gently encourage them to try new things. You don't want to get stuck in old habits. So treating anxiety beyond the home, we have medications, SSRIs, which are like Prozac, Zoloft. They help regulate neurotransmitters, and they're generally well tolerated in children and adolescents. The therapy, if you're looking for someone to address anxiety outside the home, you want them to have these components in their therapy. You know, we went over a lot of them actually, so you should be pretty well versed now. The examining thinking and feelings, so like I said, exploring those negative thoughts and having them really identify feelings, because each feeling you use a different strategy to cope with. So you want to identify, is it anxiety at this moment, or anger, or sadness, and depending on the feeling is how you address those worries or concerns. Education, the psychoed, like we spent, you know, a little bit of the initial set of this session going over, involving parents in schools. So obviously the kids are in school all day, so you want to connect with the school to some extent. Homework, which I mean is practicing their skills at home, facing their fears, and, you know, when I work with kids, I'm more as a coach than an expert. You know, none of us are an expert on dealing with our anxiety. We all let anxiety creep in on occasion and make us avoid things. So, you know, it's important that you kind of have that type of a relationship with the kids. So this is us. We're NIMH. We enroll children from ages 8 to 17. This is what our research includes. Medical evals. We also offer treatment after the initial participation, which is either computer tasks or fMRI tasks. And obviously, you know, we let you choose between psychotherapy and medication because, going back to this slide, we know that both of these work very well. Medication works well, therapy works well, and actually a combination of therapy and medication is also incredibly effective. And that is, to participate, the kids must be healthy and not be taking any medication when they enroll in the study, but they can eventually take medications later on. This is if you're interested in contacting us, so it looks like I made it right to 12:45, so I'm feeling pretty good about our timing. These are just general, the first, patientinfo.nimh.nih.gov, all different types of studies. So we obviously study more, not my group, but we study more than just anxiety disorders. There are studies for ADHD, there are studies for bipolar disorder, severe mood dysregulation, schizophrenia, spectrum disorder, and you can look there to find information on all the different studies to possibly participate. This is my research assistant, so this is for general information on our studies. Second number is Lucy. She's wonderful. She's the nurse I work with. She's great for referrals, or she can always contact me or any of the psychiatrists to help individuals if they have questions about referrals in the specific area of where they live. And really, we are a resource to you. We are, you know, government funded, and so we're here to, you know, provide information in any way that we can help with. In terms of these types of anxieties or worries, we're happy to. And these are great resources. I always want to leave out, you know, places you can go. So the www.aboutOurKids.org is an excellent free resource site. It's fantastic. They have all types of good resources, fact sheets, and interventions that you can do in school or at home. Vanderbilt.edu is one more that addresses spectrum issues and the little bitty younger kids, so I think it's always important to get it out there. And the school psychiatry link, the massgeneral.org, will give actually school interventions you can present and ask and see if they can implement those, and Helping Your Anxious Child, a step-by-step guide for parents. Just an excellent book on the way you can handle and help. It really goes into more depth, but it's kind of what I went over in this presentation, and help you really deal with anxiety at home. So thank you for all of you for being really attentive. Thank you for excusing my cough. I'm still getting over a cold a little bit. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Alrighty, folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Directions on how to do so or on your screen. It will be shortly. Or you can chat your questions into the Q&A or the chat.
I had a question. This is Becky Henry. I tried to send it via chat, but it didn't work for me. I don't know if other people are having that issue. But can you give any advice for parents whose kids have anxiety or express anxiety over really extraordinary events, such as like a terrorist attack or the Newtown shooting, especially older kids who kind of hear about these things, even if you don't really want to talk to them about it, because those are things that even parents, you know, can't really understand and would be worried about. I just wonder if you had any advice.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of Newtown shootings or like you're saying 9/11, and actually a lot of those things for kids with an underlying anxiety disorder, many times those things will trigger it, make it larger, because obviously those are extreme, you know, events, and they're very unpredictable. And we know, you know, anxiety comes from that unpredictable, that sense of being unpredictable is, you know, feeds anxiety. So there's a number of ways, you know, I tend to handle it. For the younger kids, well, first of all, parents, because it's very true, you know, seeing that or hearing about things like Newtown, you know, your own emotions are very, very strong. So before, you know, deal with your own, you know, even if you have to postpone having a full conversation with the child so you're feeling calm, you know, you want to be calm and you don't want to kind of, you know, transmit any anxiety regarding these, you know, this information. Because kids are really good on reading, you know, signals. So it's important to be calm and relaxed when you talk to them about it. Have them understand about all the safety nets that are there. You know, don't excessively reassure them, but have that conversation that, you know, the school has a plan XYZ, you know, mom will send you to safe places, you know. It's a level of, you do want to reassure them in a very, you know, small, short doses of all of the safety that is in place if for some reason those things would happen, because you cannot reassure them that it will never happen to them. You know, you just, instead of, if they keep saying, will it happen, you know, I always explain, it's the third thing is that the chances are very, very, very unlikely. When you get much older kids, I tend to do probability and have them understand that the probability of these things happening to them is very, very tiny. But in general, you have them understand that of all the safety nets that are in place, and that you as a parent are confident that where you send them is safe. So, and that you've learned, people have learned from all these kind of situations. So that's how I tend to do it, is you provide your brief reassurance and have them understand the safety nets that are in place at a school, at home, if these events occur, and third, probability if you have a little older kids.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I do see a question on school refusal, and I will go into that briefly. School refusal is incredibly heterogeneous, so there's a lot of different things that will cause it. So I'd be happy to kind of, if you want to give me a specific, you know, I can do that. But essentially, separation anxiety, difficulties in school can cause school refusal. Bullying, having a learning disability can cause school refusal. You know, a school refusal is incredibly, incredibly difficult to work on. You really need a multi-system approach. So you want to have, obviously, someone in the community that's helping the kid, dealing with teaching them skills to get back into school, whether it's a therapist, you know, counselor, whoever, a trusted person. You want the schools obviously as involved as they can be, helping you get them in the door, out the door. And then the home is very, very difficult. That's usually where I get the parents also expressing the most kind of frustration and anxiety is how do I get them out the door? You know, in a quick, generic way, you know, it's important to kind of understand that if you have difficulties getting them out, maybe you have another relative, or I've had friends of the parents come and help the kids get out the door. You know, that can be something if you find that they've just, you know, kind of just dig in their feet with a certain person. And also having the school, you know, have some types of rewards or some types of positive feedback. Getting more positive feedback will help them also get in the door. But school refusal is incredibly hard. I feel for any parent that has to, you know, contend with that. And you really need a multi-system approach with that. So, you know, I usually do the whole I have a whole day-long presentation I'm doing for Montgomery County on school refusal, so it takes more than a quick thing, but hopefully that helps maybe a little bit. Do you have any resources? I'll look at the second question that I have. Do you have any resources for immigrant children? Spanish present high levels of anxiety due to apprehension, experience, new language, culture, immigration. So I would look at that aboutourkids.org. That's located in New York City, that group. It's with NYU Child Study Center, and they probably do. That website is very you know, very thorough and really covers most topics. So that is where I would look, and they should have them in different languages too as well. So hopefully that helps.
We have a few more minutes. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to ask.
Okay, looks like Maureen Osborne has a question. Maureen, if you could unmute your phone by pressing #6, you can then ask your question. Okay, Maureen, I'm going to try to unmute you on my end and see if you can ask your question then.
Thank you. I wasn't able to do it on my end. I do have a question concerning how much of the anxiety may be coming from the parents. Many of our students the parents are telling us they're anxious, but it's very obvious that a lot of the anxiety is stemming from the parents' approach.
Right. I mean, that is a big, because it can go either way, you know. And I guess you're right. The thing is that for twofold. Number one, just naturally, as a parent, you want to care and, you know, comfort your child. But you know, the way to work on it is to not care, and just to empathize, but not care and let them avoid. And I know that's a lot of people in the school setting, a lot of school, you know, counselors run into that, where the parents are letting them either avoid too much, or, you know, on top of it, or the parent's anxious reaction is increasing the child's anxiety, either well as expectations for school or socially or performance. And so that's when it really takes an intervention on the parental level. The kids can't do anything, you know, as you can imagine, but being able to, whoever works with the child, if they can explain in a nice way to the parents, or what I usually do is, again, give them handouts. There's a great chapter in that book, Helping Your Anxious Child. It's literally, there's one chapter only on parental response, and I have a copy of it like here in my office, and as I start every session, so parents don't feel they're kind of centered out, you know, I give them that and say that they have to, you know, that's a really good guide in helping them. And if they have to, you know, if they can't do those things, having them just remove themselves the best way is another good way if they're just too anxious themselves.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, it looks like Christine Driscoll has a question. You can unmute yourself, Christine, and ask your question.
This is Christine. Am I coming through?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good. Hi. My daughter does have generalized anxiety disorder. So she's in 4th grade now, so sometimes I won't know that she's ruminating about something at school until she's almost like threatening suicide. So I'm very vigilant talking with her every day, checking in and teasing things out, but I feel like, is there a part of this whole disorder where you can't even process how stressed you are? And is there a way for parents
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, just because when you talk, you know, how I said you have to recognize kind of the sound of worry. A lot of these kids just kind of, and we've looked at studies, you know, kind of are just born on the anxious spectrum. So they don't realize that those are worries, you know. So then I'll get to your second part. I know you had a second part. So I think it's naturally part of the generalized anxiety to have that. So they have to learn to identify it before it grows too big. So, and then what was the second part?
In the meantime, while we're learning how to identify the anxiety as, you know, and label it as that, what can I do to help, or is there anything I can do in helping promote that? And is she old enough to learn that kind of a skill?
I would think in 4th grade, sure. I mean, she's definitely old enough. It'll take a while, you know, for her to internalize that skill. The other skill for her to really learn is understand, like we were saying with that initial research, we're finding that, you know, the kids will feel it even before they really can identify the thoughts, you know. So having them understand the physical symptoms first, too, is another way, and that one's pretty easy and straightforward, of having her identify those. And when those start to go off, then what you want to do is come up with a plan before it starts. Like you're saying, what happens is she gets, you know, even subtle things probably trigger it. Then her anxiety increases. Then maybe more thoughts come and more things happen. And then, like you're saying, she's getting to this point where it's just overwhelmed. So picking it up earlier, having her identify it earlier. And with those, you do want to have, in which you probably have, but you know, early on, a lot of like stress relaxation kind of skills, you know, and having her practice it when she's not anxious, you know, every night listening to music, or the thoughts, you can write them down in a journal, any way to kind of externalize them out of her body, and also finding ways to calm her body down as well. So that's a short answer to probably, it's a very difficult thing to contend with, and eventually it has to kind of fall on the onus of the kid in terms of being able to identify when it's getting out of hand. But it sounds like you're doing a good job really, you know, staying on top of it.
Yes, we're vigilant.
Yes, that's great. No, that's very, very important, because you're right. If you let it go too long, then it just gets out of control.
Can I have a follow-up with this question?
I think, yeah, if there's no one else, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So being with her for 10 years now, her reaction, it is as serious as it sounds to her. So now when she says things like, I just want to die, when she's in an overwhelmed state, I take it seriously, but I don't take it seriously. So I take it seriously that she's telling me she's overwhelmed and I need to help intervene and get her to calm down and then come up with a plan. But I don't really feel like she's threatening actual suicide attempt. So that, my question as a parent is, I mean, I'm just kind of going on instinct, but I feel like I could use some more guidance on how do I tease it out between that overwhelmed feeling and expressing everything, you know, to the worst degree versus it being a true threat, or is that just, that's a big question.
I mean, it is a big question, and I think it depends on each case. In general, you are right, though. You know, I think you get a sense if it's anxiety speaking or anxiety to the point of overwhelmed and she's going to do something, you know. I do think you start to have the discussion with her as, you know, having other ways to express it, just because you don't want to always have to, like, tease it apart, you know, to her. You know, you want to have her understand that mom wants to be able to respond a certain way, you know. So I think eventually, now she's starting to get to an age where she'll start to be able to do that, you know. Again, it's her way of saying I'm overwhelmed, but eventually I would want to have that conversation with her when she's calmer to say, I really want to always be able to help you. But if you're feeling that those are very serious things to say, and I want to be able to always address them the right way, you know, and I think she's old enough to do that. But in general, yes, you've got the right, you know, vibe of it. You know when she's probably in a dangerous situation. But it is very, as you know, case by case and day by day with generalized anxiety.
I know. And then when to share that with school staff.
Oh, and when to share that with the school staff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult one, and that's why you want to encourage her to start to learn to use the right words, you know, of what she's feeling. That's why I think having her identify and use better words, she's getting to the age where she can start to do that, you know, so she doesn't freak people out by saying it when she's just overwhelmed.
Yeah, okay. Those kind of go together. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
Do we have one more question from Melissa Brown? I don't know if she's already asked or not.
Yeah, Melissa, you can press #6 to unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, I'll try unmuting you on our end.
Okay. Now that works. My question is, I have a 17-year-old daughter with generalized anxiety disorder. However, it seems pretty intense, and we're going through things. I'm trying to figure out how to keep her safe in real-world situations, like we're learning how to drive right now. So when the anxiety takes over, she does not respond in a normal situation. So like if a bug flies through the window, she just completely gives up the wheel, and, you know, things are very serious for me. So I don't know how to get through the anxiety and keep her safe, but yet keep her going at the rate that she should be going. As a 17-year-old, she should be doing those things.
Yeah, no, I mean, I give you a lot of credit that you're allowing her to do. I think it's really important that she's doing those things, you know, and that you're not avoiding or backing up or any of those things. So that's great, you know. It's really tricky. I mean, I feel like it would be good to have, like in that one, she's got to start to learn how to kind of slowly getting into it would be good. I mean, it's almost you want to do your own version of exposure therapy, which I know this sounds random, but I would almost like, you know, have her driving in a very, like, in a parking lot, you know, start to practice and get a little, like, plastic fly, you know? You know what I'm saying? And have it sit on the, have it sit on the dashboard, you know? Like, start what you want her, she's going to, because it sounds like it's just such a gut reaction, correct? Isn't it? She just lets go and she loses her mind, right? So it's back to that amygdala. It really is. It's not that she's crazy or weird. It's just she's seeing it and she's freaking out. So you have to slowly desensitize her. So, I mean, it'd be good. You can either try and figure it out with her. She might be able to be creative about that, or, again, getting someone that knows how to do this, just even not that you need a lot of therapy, but to come up with a little hierarchy of how you would do that. You know, like I just gave you the kind of the first step. You know, even if she can't do an actual plastic one, do a little picture. Get a picture and stick it on the dashboard, okay? And let her slowly get over it, because that one's really, you know, pure exposure therapy plus obviously learning to calm down and maybe listen to music and refocus herself on the road. So that's hopefully a short answer to, I know it's something that's going to take a little bit of time to get over.
Do you think meds, though, are helpful for anxiety? Because I'm trying to, I'm on the fence.
Yes, I mean, many kids respond very well to it, you know, they really do. So it's shown to be safe. The SSRIs, Prozac and Zoloft are the basic ones that are used, that are prescribed. And they kind of take that edge off so they can do those things. It doesn't remove anxiety, which is good. We don't want them to be non-anxious completely, but it kind of gets it at a better level.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's fine. So it's 1:05, and I don't want to keep our presenter and everyone past our allotted time. So unless there is anything else, I just want to thank everyone for coming. And I'd like to ask you, all the participants, to please fill out a very brief poll that we'll be putting up. Just came up. It's just 3 questions, but it helps us a lot with continuing to improve our offerings. And I want to thank Dr. Berman for being with us today. This was really great, informative, and I'm sure will be helpful to a lot of people.
All right. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you.